Thank you all for joining us today for what is the six of six sessions in this year's Getting Into the Weeds winter webinar series. So this year, and I think I've said this six times now, but we took a little bit of a departure from our usually production focused talks to do something more around cost of production, giving us our theme this year from cost to confidence. So today's session, we're doing a horticulture grower cost of production panel. We did a session like this earlier in the webinar series with our livestock producers, and it went really well. So I have high hopes for today. So I'll be one of your moderators today, Matthew Pyle, and we're also joined by my colleague, Talia Plaskett, as well as our panelists who we'll introduce here in a second. So just a few quick housekeeping things before we get going. All participants will have their audio and video turned off during the webinar, so don't worry about making noise or being seen. If you would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A and chat features at the bottom of your screen. I'll be moderating or looking at those throughout the session. So if you have a question, we'll definitely get it out there. Questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Also, please keep an eye on the chat function as some links will be posted there for surveys, resources, etc. We are recording this webinar and the recorded video will be shared later. A few of our previous sessions are already up on the Perennia YouTube, and the remainder will be up shortly after this presentation. So, without further ado, I'll let our panelists introduce themselves here in a second, but we have Gary Hart, Sam Lute, Yvonne Schoening, and Jeff Orr. And I'll let them go through, introduce where they farm, what they farm, and then we'll jump into our panelist questions. So where I got you at the top of the list, I'll let you start off, Gary.
Yeah, I'm Gary Hart. I manage 9.5 acres of hay grove tunnels for Vitalberry Farms. I've been doing that since 2007. We grow blackberries, raspberries, strawberries, string beans, and we've grown numerous other crops. But we've settled on these ones for the time being, and it's we start late March and we finish up end of October. This is when my guys go home. We use primarily offshore Mexican labor. That's what we use for labor, and yeah, it's a keeps us busy. So
Great, thanks, Gary. Sam, I'll get you to introduce yourself next.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Sam Lutz with Lutz Family Farm. I'm a sixth generation farmer in Rockland, Nova Scotia. We manage about 175 acres of tree fruit right now, primarily apples, probably about 95% apples, but we do have some a smaller acreage of peaches and pears with more going in over the next few years. We have a small family farm management team of 5 year round, and then again we use temporary foreign workers primarily from Jamaica for to manage throughout the spring, summer, and of course a bigger crew for the harvest.
Okay, great. Yvonne.
Yeah, hi, I'm Yvonne. We moved to Nova Scotia 3 years ago from Germany, so you will hear a fairly thick accent here. I joined Yost Vineyards right away then, and Yost Vineyard farms about 110 acres here at the North Shore and in the valley. So we have vineyard managers on each site, and then we work with temporary foreign workers as well during the season.
Okay, great. And Jeff.
Yeah, thanks. I'm a first generation farmer. I've been farming about 40 years, always on a part-time basis. I grow wild blueberries and keep honeybees. I have about 100 acres of wild blueberries in Cumberland and Guysborough counties. Guysborough County because I used to live in Antigonish, although I grew up in Parisborough. Anyway, and I have 100 colonies of bees that I keep in Guysborough, Antigonish area. So yeah, that's the my operation.
Yeah, good mix of stuff. All right, great. Now that we have the introductions out of the way, I'll let Talia kick us off with our first question.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about this session. I think we've got a good diversity here today. So hopefully, yeah, we'll get some good stuff. So first question, when did you begin tracking cost of production on farm? Is it something that you've always done? Or is this something that was maybe triggered by a reason or event? Why don't we start with Yvonne?
Yeah, when I joined, as I said, 3 years ago, they've already they've already had a quite good tracking of hours for each sort of tasks in the vineyard, and also it's quite important because they also the foreign workers sometimes work in different departments, so we kind of try to keep that separate. So I had about 10 years of data for that, which was I found great because I wanted to focus on efficiencies. And so you can kind of show your improvements or you have sort of a benchmark where you want to go. And then for costs, it was a little different because, of course, we have all the GLs, but it was not really cleared out. So I started basically having sort of clear costs for, um, varieties and tasks, sort of. So yeah, I'll start at that. So we have sort of about 3 years of data for that now.
Okay, so you improved, that you guys had a good history of that collection already on the farm, and then you sort of added to it in the time that you've been there.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Awesome. All right, Jeff, what about you?
Yeah, well, when I first started out, because I was a first generation farmer, I started out with one field, and I was actually living in Saskatchewan at the time, so I had people helping me. It was pretty simple at that time. I would get a spreadsheet at the or like a income and expense sheet at the end of the year from the person doing it, so I would analyze that and. I didn't have much equipment, but I've grown the operation, and as I expanded, things got more complicated. But I still have used the same method of thinking about, well, what are my inputs for each field, and analyzing it on that basis. But it's because it's been a small operation that I suppose my accounting has grown a bit with it, but I've kept the same tried and true methods, and I'll admit, pencil and paper and sometimes pen approach.
Not pen every time, though, only sometimes, right? All right, what about you, Sam?
Yeah, so I've been full time with our operations for I think going into my fourth season, but I've sort of been involved for a little more than a decade beyond that. And starting out, we've always tracked cost of production kind of roughly. Usually we'd get to the end of the season and kind of work backwards. All right, well, we produced X poundage of fruit over X amount of acreage. All right, well, that means we're producing, so many bins per acre of fruit. But it was generally on quite a large, broad scale basis, and I found that it was tougher to make individual management decisions when most of our cost of production and a lot of our data was sort of averaged out across of our whole farm. So it was
Mhm.
harder for us to look at individual blocks and see how they're performing without going and digging through the more granular data itself. So in the last probably 3 or 4 years, we've really tried to uh, be more specific in how we track cost of production, break the farm down into smaller, more manageable units. And then from those units, we can get more in the weeds. We can have a more accurate cost of production and use that for kind of larger scale decision making. So a lot of it, yeah, it started out with, just working backwards from big data sets that we had. But so slowly we've sort of broken that down into, more and more spreadsheets, more granular data sets and smaller sections of the farm to block out. Especially now as we're We're revitalizing the farm and moving from more low density into high density plantings. As we have new plantings going in, it's good to have a full production history, a full expense history, and that way we can track it from the get-go. We're sort of working backwards with a lot of their 15, 20, 30-year-old blocks and trying to get a better setup there. So moving forward, trying to keep it clean and just trying to gradually improve our older data as we go.
Yeah, that's a really nice way to do it as you guys transition to the different density and, start from the beginning. All right, and Gary.
Yeah, we started off in 2007 and there was no history for greenhouse crops under high tunnels in Nova Scotia that we were aware of. So we kind of tracked everything, mainly our labor, because we knew that was going to be our biggest expense. Then came our inputs, and we recorded everything, man hours per unit. And as the years went on, we just kept recording all that, and we started developing a history on what our cost of production was and where we could gain on efficiencies. And that was our biggest thing, trying to gain on efficiencies on everything. And after 20 years, we've done quite a bit, but there's always something to gain. Um, yeah, so and we record our chemicals and our fertilizers. We have recipes for all our crops. Right now, I'm growing four different crops: blackberries, raspberries, strawberries, and beans. But we've tried probably 10 other crops over the years to see how the markets would handle them. But we've concluded on these ones. But it just is on the record keeping. You got to keep accurate records, as accurate as you can, because then you'll get more accurate cost production. And we're
Mhm.
gaining on that every year with our crops.
So, Gary, for some of those things that you guys have tried and maybe are no longer doing, like would you have tracked cost of production for those as well?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes.
And would that have been maybe part of the reason why you didn't continue forward with them?
Um, yeah, in part, but the other part of it is our customers. We couldn't get the price out of them to
Mm,
warrant growing them in high tunnels, because high tunnels are an extra cost over growing in the fields, and you have to get the yield per acre plus the cost per unit to make it worthwhile. So
yeah.
some of them we tried for 1 year or 2 years, and no, that wasn't going to work. So we switched over. We grew grape tomatoes for a lot of years, but the amount of money we got per pound was dropping every year because they could get them elsewhere cheaper with
Mm,
cheaper labor rates. So, and our labor rate continues to climb every year. So that's one
bit
of
of
the
a
biggest
pinch.
problems. So,
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
yeah.
This is actually a good way to segue into our next question, which is what information do you collect for cost of production and how often do you record it? So since you were already just talking about that, Gary, maybe you can just launch into that.
Yeah, I'm constantly recording the labor from planting to harvest to spraying because it's all manual labor, and that's our cost is probably about 55%. Our labor cost is
Hmm.
harvest. So I record all the harvest labor, how many people I'm using for how many hours a day, and I compare that at the end of the day with how many units we picked and how much dollars we're going to get per unit, right? And as long as we're
Hmm.
making money, I keep picking. But sometimes when the beans start to slow down or the blackberries slow down, it's not worthwhile picking anymore
Hmm.
because you're not getting as much money because there's not as much crop on the plant to get the yield for that day to cover your costs. So then we
Yeah, the
stop.
labor to go through the crop isn't justifying what you're picking. That makes
Yeah,
perfect sense.
yeah.
Um, and so it sounds like that's almost, at least
It's a
during the
daily.
harvest, yeah, daily thing. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Once harvest starts, it's daily. But I keep records on everything else. So I know how many hours for each, like it's the man hours per job. Like we could be weeding, we could be spraying, we could be planting, we could be doing trellis work.
Hmm.
And I know how each one of my greenhouses is 0.21 of an acre thereabouts. So I know how many man hours per acre it takes to do each job. So I can put that into my budget in the wintertime for the next year And we get more efficient every year because I have the same people doing the same jobs every year.
Mm.
So they get better at it and they know what's expected and they do a good job. So
No, that's great. All right, great answer. Let's get you to chime in next, Jeff.
Yeah, well, you'll all be interested. I guess the fact you've been everyone's been talking a lot about labor costs, and I hardly have any labor costs other than my own because of the nature of my operation, and I marvel at how you manage all that labor. So, but the costs that I track I do things basically on three ways. One, I look at the inputs that I'm making in each field, and that's for pesticides and fertilizer and the number of pollinator units I put in. So I measure that on the basis of each acre. But my biggest costs are equipment and repair and maintenance of equipment and fuel because I'm moving around. I have 9 different fields across 2 counties. So I basically track that as an aggregate number, and then I attribute so much per acre or so much per field on the basis. So if it costs me $30,000 for repairs, I divide that by the acres, and I do that. And then the third thing that I track, which I can only track after the crop comes in, and in fact, it's usually months after the crop comes in that I know the price because the wild blueberries are processed and sold to processors. And we're actually investing in the crop for 2 years and maybe even a month or two after that before we know the price. So it's really a very unusual arrangement that we have, and one that makes it very difficult to predict. You can't predict your revenue, uh, and then we have, of course, weather events and other things associated with it. But so I'm looking at inputs, which I can easily do per field as far as uh, pesticides, etc. And then the average of the costs for maintenance and repairs and fuel, things like that. And then the third thing, which comes later, which is my revenue.
Very good. Do you track performance of individual fields? I guess you would at least have the
Yeah,
yield information, all that kind of stuff. Do you ever pull out of them from time
yeah.
to time? Yeah.
And over the last couple years, we've had some very serious challenges around price. And you may or may not know that wild blueberry fields, you don't plant them. You have to create the conditions where there are wild blueberries. So you're always looking for percentage of coverage. And as I've developed a number of these fields, some of them I've dug out of the woods, some of them I've bought. But the fields that are more marginal that you're bringing into production that the clones haven't spread all throughout are the ones that are the least economical. And so right now, out of the 9 fields that I have, I'm resting one of those fields. You're investing in that field. You want to bring the production of it up, but it doesn't make sense to harvest that this particular field at this time because the coverage of that field is lower and the yield. So you're basically emptying your wallet on the ground with inputs because the percentage of coverage isn't there.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, great. We'll move on to Yvonne now.
Yeah, we do basically, it's quite similar to what Gary said. We do pretty much a daily recording of all the hours we spend in the vineyards. Um, and that goes by variety or by block, because they can differ quite a bit from each variety. How long, for example, tucking takes or pruning, etc. And then we do more like a weekly checkup on all the supply costs, all the servicing costs for the tractors and all, the leases, everything that goes into that. And during the winter time, that's actually more like a monthly thing because it's not
Hmm.
so much going on. But
Yeah,
during the
definitely.
season, we definitely try to do that weekly. And I'll have sort of a little spreadsheet set up where I see where I'm at in with the budgeting, right? So we're not crazy overspending, and with the volatility of the markets at the moment, right, for commodities, it's probably a good thing to know where you're at roughly. Um, I I with us with the wines, we're quite, this is the only thing we do, so there's not much planning. We have to get the fertilizer anyways, but for field crops, for example, which what we do on the home farm, it's quite valuable, and that's what Sam mentioned too, to know all your historical data, or Gary mentioned that too, to to go back and see, hey, if this is a year where fertilizer prices are probably through the roof, which crop are we really going with, right? Because it it can change so fast. So yeah, it's not really doesn't really apply for vineyards because we gotta keep them healthy and going no matter what. But yeah,
Yeah.
and then we also try to keep. We have 3 different sites, so we try to keep them quite separate from recording, so we
Hmm.
know who's doing what, and then also you can compare them a bit and be a little competitive. Kind of spurs everyone on. Yeah.
No, that's great. That's a great answer. All right, Sam.
Yeah, again, as sort of Yvonne and Gary hinted at, I think labor is our biggest expense, as a percentage of the whole pie. And if you're going to spend that much money on it, you should have a good idea of where your dollar's going. So we try and track it very, very closely in detail, how much we're spending on each task within each block, to try and nail down a labor expense, per block. Because, when you're farming at scale, small differences in margin are going to make a big difference. If you're having the price of a bin of apples for a variety come down by $20 can be a big difference. So and likewise, if you can shave 10 or 20% off your labor cost for a block, that it can make a big difference in terms of the financial viability of your operation. So we try to very, very in detail track exactly how we're spending our labor. We're also the on the flip side, we try and track our harvest data very, very closely. If you take your total bins produced and divide it by your whole acreage, it's like, well, you might have a very average looking farm, but half of your blocks might be carrying 70 or 80% of your actual harvested fruit value. So, by having a better idea of where you're spending your labor and your other inputs, we track our chemicals, our fertilizers, as well, and try and get a cost for that. But yeah, I think just having a better idea of or a more granular view of your expenses and your revenue for a block, it just allows you to make better management decisions and make them more
Hmm.
quickly. You can really get into the weeds with this stuff, but if you ask a farmer who would really probably rather be out in the fields to go through and spend an hour and putting stuff, kind of tediously into a spreadsheet, you're not going to get a lot of buy-in. So there's certainly diminishing returns. I think you have to decide what kind of unit level you want to divide your farm down into and track costs for. That is
Hmm.
going to be still give you a representative data set, to make decisions with, but also not be cumbersome to deal with because, you know, a great system isn't going to do you any good if no one's actually using it.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, ease of use is definitely something we've been running into. I have a question though, sort of jumping off of something that Gary mentioned, but I guess how much are you in a similar boat where like 55% or something like that of your labor is in harvest? And then also, what is your what percentage does labor make up of your total cost?
So for just our labor expense, our last 2 years, yeah, we're hovering about between 50 and 60%. Obviously
Hmm.
last year during the drought, it was a little higher because we had, it takes a lot longer to go through and pick the quality fruit that's there.
Definitely.
But yeah, we track it by both hours and by our cost. Certain jobs on our farm are paid out at a higher rate. We track tractor operation, and certain jobs are done either by more experienced staff members, or we'll have a higher wage rate associated with it. So we track it both by total hours and by the actual cost of the labor.
Okay. No, that's great. And I guess Yvonne and Gary, yeah, what percentage does labor make up of your total cost, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, we're
Um,
probably about 50% too, or probably a little higher, depending on
okay.
what we pick by hand or what we pick by machine, right? That like harvesting like by hand takes a lot of hours usually,
D
but yeah.
Definitely. And Gary?
Yeah, we're in the same boat. Anytime you're hand picking something, we're 55 to 60% on labor.
Yeah.
The rest is on inputs, fertilizer, chemicals, machinery, diesel.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that makes perfect sense. All right. So,
And for I was just gonna because we're on the topic anyways with the labor costs, right? From knowing from the home farm that a lot of sort of people don't track their own hours.
mm,
That is so valuable to kind of just count that in and not just work away and think, yeah, well, yeah, if you have your own farm, you don't work for $15 an hour usually, right? So
yeah.
shout out to everyone. You gotta do it.
Yeah. No, and that definitely came up in the livestock discussion as well. So,
Yeah. Your time counts, so we gotta keep track of it for sure. All right, so this question, it's kind of jumping off what Sam was talking about with cost of production, but so what methods or programs are you using to track that information? And I guess a bit of a sub question, is there anything that you've tried and maybe like really didn't work for you? So I think let's see what order we've done here. I think we'll maybe start things off with Sam for this one.
Sure. So as we, again, over the last couple of years have delved further into cost of production and trying to be a little more accurate, we've tried a lot of the commercial tools that are available, whether it's Ag Expert Field. We do some work with Crop Tracker. We've tried a host of third-party applications. I find horticulture is so broad that it's tough for a company to build a suite of software that's going to work for every type of farm. I think field crops have very different expenses and revenues than livestock, and tree fruit has a very different cost of planting and cost of establishing orchard than something like annual crops. So we found it pretty tough to find something that really fit everything we wanted to do. So then we started building out our own sheets. We have a suite of stuff on Google Sheets and Excel documents that are. I spent the last couple of years building out. They're fairly involved. They use a lot of formulas to kind of pull things all over from different sheets so that I can track labor somewhere, I track harvest somewhere, and I have other sheets that will pull costs and revenues from both. But those are the big two is building out spreadsheets, and we've since started kind of building out our own app or our own like single site place to store all of our records. Because again, the problem with spreadsheets is when they get stored over across multiple computers or they're in the cloud, and you got to have multiple people inputting into it. Sometimes it's tricky to get all of the correct information in the right place in a timely manner. So we're trying to kind of make a one-stop shop spot to store all your data, so that everyone that is in your management team or wherever you want to share that information has quick access at a glance.
Interesting. And have you come across programs that are like tree fruit specific, or have you found that
Talia,
they
you're a
are?
bit quiet.
Can you hear me better now? Sorry.
Still quiet.
Still
Yeah,
quiet.
we can hardly hear you, Talia.
Now you're not making any noise at all.
Like, was your question if there's any like readily available tools that we are using or that we find that did fit?
John, can't hear you.
Yeah, I can't hear you at all, Talia.
Assuming that was a question,
Yeah, we'll just go with that for
we
now.
use
No
bits and
worries.
pieces of a few things. We use Crop Tracker, is great at tracking our spray program and certain aspects of it. and there's some financial software that does a pretty good job at breaking down our revenues, but it was sort of I was using bits and pieces of a whole bunch of different apps and products, um, which I found pretty tedious to work through, and having and they'd all export their data in different formats. So we've since just really dialed in on either building out our own record keeping books, whether it's spreadsheets or, like I said, some other software, and just kind of combining it all into one place.
Okay. No, that's a great answer. I'm not sure if Talia can talk
I'm gonna
again.
I'm
Oh,
gonna
yep.
you can hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Oh God. Okay. Yeah, I guess I was curious if you guys have come across like tree fruit specific cost of production tracking apps, or have they mostly just been like horticulture and then like tossed a suite at you?
Yeah, that's often what it is. I think like we tried Ag Expert Field and we tried some other stuff, but there's just a lack of customizability. Like every farm's different.
Mm.
You've got different blocks, you've got different crops, you've got different inputs, whether you're farming out your some of your labor or doing more of your work in house. So I tried to work with some of this stuff, but I couldn't, if I wanted to send my guys pruning, there's no pruning section in the labor sheet to assign that task
Ah,
to. So I'd have to, try and either make some code or make some equivalences. And as we found that doing it ourselves is the only way we found to get the exact data that we want tracked in the format that we want it.
I also like your point of having multiple people contribute to the database, so you don't necessarily just have one person inputting the data, but it has to be something that multiple managers can work with every day on the fly.
Yeah, you
So I
you have
think
so many
that's
costs that, our management team that does our equipment maintenance or, purchasing of equipment is different than the people that are planning out our spray program and our labor costs and, making capital investments and managing the actual finances. So being able to have everyone on the team kind of contribute in their own area of expertise has been kind of a boon for us.
And just a
absolutely.
clarifying question because it popped up in the chat. So you mentioned that all of those spreadsheets are on Google Sheets for the most part?
Yep. Yeah, we had them in a shared Google Drive.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
All right. Yvonne, what have you played with to
I
uh
love Sam's experience because we're struggling with the same thing. There is very specific apps for vineyards. There's eVineyard. There's another one called Moosel that I I'd love to introduce and kind of use, but it is really tedious to set it all up and then have everyone in the team kind of using it too, or or make them use it because it's not good data if there's if people skip task or don't want to really use it for it. So for now we're set on spreadsheets too, but it really is the it's not good if only I use it. It's basically Sam's experience. You got to share it. You have to set it up that everyone's kind of it's readily and easily to use for everyone. It's if I set it up and it's logic for me, it doesn't mean the next one kind of looks at it and thinks that's great. So yeah, we have the budgeting sort of spreadsheet, like an overview we use, and then I'll have sheets for every block basically, and then my sort of responsibility ends at harvest, and then we kind of, I mean, we're not actually selling it off to our winery, but that's kind of the idea, right? Because we buy a lot of other grapes from other growers too, so that's where my part of
Mm.
the cost of production really ends, and we're not, and then all the winemaking costs is a separate team. Um, yeah, so we're on that crossroads too. So where do we go? Do we keep spreadsheets? Do we really dive into a specific app and have everyone using it? Because it seems nicer to just use an app on the go, be out in the field, kind of clock in and out while I'm spraying, and not sit at the computer later for half an hour or so and kind of type it all in. So yeah, not entirely sure where we're going with this yet.
But yeah, it does sound like accessibility is important so that you don't have to go sit at the computer and kind of crunch numbers throughout the day.
Yeah.
Like part of
Everyone's rather
avoiding the number
outside.
crunch too, is like the way that we design out our spreadsheets is we don't do a lot of hand calculations. We're not like for us, it's
Mm,
like it's input the data and it's have in the back end or in your Excel formulas or whatever, have the stuff laid out so that it'll export the data in however format you want it. And that way, like even though a lot of our tools that we're using, we really only started using in probably 2024, some in 2023. We can go back, we can input our harvest data from the years prior, and we can get kind of rough costs going backwards. So any bit of work you do is good because it can either be backdated or any tools you develop you can use again in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. All right, Gary, what do you think? What are you using?
I used to record it all by pen and paper at one point, which was very tedious. Um, then we went with Virtual One, and we found that that was a software program that the company bought. See, I'm part of Dykeview Farms Nova Agri Group, and we have blueberry acres, and we also have another strawberry division. We have different crops, so the labor gets shifted around where it's needed at certain times of the day or the season. So we went with Virtual One to clock people in, clock people out when they showed up for the job, and then when they left. And to some extent, we would record with that. We would scan. Every worker has a badge with a barcode, and it will record them when they came in, when they left. But now we're switched over to virtual or to Second Sight, a different software program for the last couple of years. And with that, it's a better system. It's you have somebody scan them in when they start during the day and scan them out when they finish that job. They go to another site or job, you scan them in there, and it's very accurate on
Mm,
the hours. But the biggest thing with this is you can actually scan their efficiencies. So
mm.
if they pick a flat of blackberries, you scan that badge, it knows exactly how many flats they'll pick in a day, each person. Same with strawberries, same with beans. We do it by the bucket with beans, and we have an average weight on the buckets. So at the end of the day, it all gets put into a software program through through the internet, and however they do it. But it gets put into that, and then we have a couple people that'll analyze that, so we know who our best pickers are for each individual crop, whether it be strawberries, blackberries, beans, blueberries. So we know who our best pickers are for each one of those.
Mm.
That's where we really gain with the Second Sight. It's a little bit of training to learn how to use it, but if you once you get doing it and you have people that are doing it every day, it's not too bad. So
So just a quick question, I guess, with the harvesting. So anytime they sort of come back with like some picked flats, would you then kind of scan the barcode, or how are you tracking the yield piece, I guess, with the barcode?
when they come down, like I have my blackberries, raspberries, strawberries are all in rows, and you have a couple people doing one row, and they bring the units down, whether it be one, two, or three at a time.
Hmm.
Then we have one guy there, he's also a picker, and he's scanning them, and that just gets recorded automatically into the computer. And the next day, I know exactly how many flats we picked, how many man hours we put into it, and I can go into the information and find out who was our fastest picker for that day, and they're all ranked each day. You know what I mean? We don't let them see that, but we know who they are, right?
Yeah. Oh,
So
very
at the end of the
interesting.
year, you can compare all those records, and it'll tell you who your better pickers are for each crop. And that way you can put, like, you might have some pickers that are better blueberry pickers than strawberry pickers, or better blackberry pickers than blueberry pickers. So we have a pool of workers, about 180 people, and we can try and put the best pickers, which was with to whatever crop they're best at picking at, and that we gain efficiencies that way.
Yeah,
So
so it sounds like this new program is much better suited to like the information you guys want to pull out of that and just
yes,
tracking a bit more accurately.
yes.
All right. And last but not least, what are you using, Jeff?
Yeah, well, I've used they're similar to what Sam talked about, the customization of Excel. Dr. Travis Esau, who's the mechanization prof at Dal Ag Campus, designed a cost of production spreadsheet for Excel, which I've used, and it's very good. It would be especially good for a larger operation. One of the advantages, or you might call it a disadvantage, that I have is the only person that I have to convince about the analysis is myself, because I run the operation myself. So I tend to still prefer using. I think Gary was mentioning about the notebook, because I like to kind of see visually what my inputs are on each field. And so I still find that so across the 9 fields that I manage, I have that data for inputs, and I do the same with honeybees. Although I have 4 different apiaries, but I aggregate that all together. But I basically have it written down in a notebook, and I keep adding as expenses go that I'm incurring with the exception of, as I mentioned earlier, my fuel and maintenance, which at the end of the year, I attribute so much per acre and per field on the basis of the overall. But that system has worked for me. Important to have the cost per acre and per field figured out. And so I can do that in a notebook in my operation. I'm very intrigued by this analysis of labor that Gary mentioned in the analysis. I don't have to worry about that because we don't do hand raking. We do, I have a harvester. I have a couple people do some custom work, but it's much easier to track. But if an individual had a larger operation and had a number of mechanical harvesters, it would be very interesting to use Gary's data around the productivity, because harvester operators have different levels of productivity. But so if I had 5 or 6 harvesters, I would be interested in that. But whereas I have one and I operate it myself, I don't need to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. Just it is very individual based on farm and operation and commodities as to what's going to really make sense for you and
Yeah,
what maybe doesn't make so much sense.
yeah.
All right, we'll launch into our last question. We've got about 15 minutes left, and we'll have some time at the end for questions from the audience. But I think we'll start with you, Jeff, again with this one. If you could go back in time and give yourself advice on how to get started tracking cost of production, what would you tell yourself?
Well, there was the most interesting question that you posed. Really, I've been at it for quite a while, but I reflected. I guess I look at it a little differently. I'm reflecting on the incredible changes that have occurred both in my own operation, but also in the complexity of costs in the time. So, like, when I first started, we didn't have to contend with severe weather events like we've had to have for the last few years. We didn't have the price volatility, and we didn't have the rapid increases in input costs. Things have so those That's made things far less predictable today. So that's been, I guess, very much on my mind. In the past, I could usually make investments in land and new equipment periodically because I had a predictability of yield. There's a rolling average of yield, as everyone who grows anything knows. Um, uh, but there was a more predictability of price, and inflation was less dramatic. So it allowed me to grow my operation bit by bit, and I just kept investing back in. But I knew that I could do that on the basis of the profitability that was there. I always calculated the annual return and projected how to plan for the next few years. But today I really have to realize that, when I kind of look at it now, is that any purchases that I'm making depend on calculating the the costs much more, I guess, sharply than in the past because profitability isn't the same. And So it's my whole calculation and projection is made in an environment where there's greater gaps between input costs and price. The only thing I can control is my input costs. I can't control the price. I can't control the weather. I can't control the yield. Um, it's really difficult to rely on past data of price or yield to grow my operation. Today in our industry, the growers that have been able to be profitable over the last few years are ones that actually do a higher percentage of custom work because they can predict because there's a scale associated with it. I talked to one grower last year after I was suffering through the worst drought that we've experienced in Cumberland County in living memory, who talked about having the best year ever, and that individual makes about 70% of his income from custom work, which you could predict. So I
Yeah.
guess I don't know really how much more how to answer this other than there's such uncertainty that you have to be very careful about the input costs. And I didn't really have to worry about that in the past so much because of the way things were.
Yeah, no, and I mean, what you all just explained is a lot of the reason why we've been going through the cost of production stuff this year, just because of how unpredictable things have been. It's basically the only option you have is try to get a better control of what you're doing on farm. No, that was a great answer. Let's go to Gary next.
Yeah. When I first started 20 years ago, I was pretty green at this, pretty new to it, but I had a director slash boss who was very experienced at doing this stuff, and he trained me up over the few years on how to keep records and stuff. I think the best thing I could tell somebody is to keep very good, accurate records. Be on top of that of where your costs are, mainly on your labor for hand hand picked stuff or products, but really be on top of your labor. And that's the biggest thing. Keep very good records. I just it was all handwritten records back then. Now it's and then you put it in the spreadsheet at the end of the week or whatever. But I didn't keep as good of records as I probably could have. But now I'm on top of that. So you learn these things, and
Yeah.
that's the biggest thing. Plus, you got the technology for like the scanners, like I said now. That records it. It's the most accurate way you can do it as long as they work. So sometimes they'll stop working, but usually this year we had no problem with them. Last year we had other issues with them. One scanner might not communicate with the other one, which goes back to the database at times. But the information was all recorded, but we couldn't see it in real time.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, just keep as accurate records as you can. Like these scanners are very expensive, and smaller operations wouldn't be able to afford these things. So if you're doing pen and paper, keep them as accurate as you can. So
No, that's a great answer, Gary. And the record keeping, not necessarily everyone's favorite thing, but incredibly important for making any of this stuff work. Um, all right. We'll let Sam go next.
Yeah, I would say that the cost of production, it's like while there is some financial data in there, it's not about getting perfect numbers to present to your bank. You can show them these perfect, beautiful cost of production numbers, and they're going to say, "Well, that's great, but please just make the mortgage payment and let me be on my way." It's the real benefit of having as accurate a cost of production as you can is having confidence in your ability to make decisions. If you're comparing two mature blocks of orchard and you only have time this year to replace one of them, it's good to be able to, well, instead of thinking, oh, wow, that block looked a little bit nicer, a little greener the last couple of years, you can just
Hmm.
look straight at the data, say, all right, this is what this block's costing us, this is what we can make off it. It really improves your decision making time. Same with labor. If you know how if you're trying to make planning decisions around, well, how early should my guys be here to prune? It's like, okay, well, last year we spent 10,000 hours on pruning, or the year before you have an average for each block. And then as you pull other blocks out, as blocks come into production, you can kind of adjust those numbers as you go. So, all right, well, the last year and the third year planning, we spent X. This year it'll be X plus 20% as those trees grow a little bigger. So I guess I would say that to define how you're going to manage your farm. Like we're about 170 acres. We've got 20 blocks, so we try and average a little under 10 acres a block, and that gives us kind of a clear unit to build off of and have a detailed information without having to be too granular. We're not wasting our time. But start with something consistent and small that's manageable. Scale it up from there and be consistent. You want to have consistent numbers so that you can work into the next year. And like I said, if you start in that first year when the block's planted, in year 10, you're going to have a really good history of your inputs, your costs. Yeah, the more consistent you can be and the earlier you can start, the better.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And it's interesting that you mentioned, um, yeah, the starting small and being consistent. I think we had someone else in the previous grower panel. It's like started small, but it seems every year they're tracking more metrics, but it's more getting into that consistent pat or habit of collecting the information, and better to just have a bit of solid information than try to do too much at once. So I think that's a great point. So I'll get you to finish us off, Yvonne.
Yeah, I can only second what everyone else said. It's just find a good system and start today, basically, if you haven't
Yeah.
started. And I just want to mention, for me coming um into like an existing operation, it is very valuable to have as much as data as you can to make good decisions going forward, right? If it's a generational farm, then you usually have some idea what the blocks look like. But if you come in and have a blank sheet, basically, it's very important. So
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
yeah.
All
All
right.
right. And so we have one Q&A question came in while we were chatting, which I think is going to be a really nice way to end off today. And then obviously, if you guys have any final comments, that's fine too. But the question is, do you have access to competitors' metrics or industry benchmarks to see how your own operation might be assessed? Why don't we start with Jeff? Do you have a benchmark?
Um, well, it's an intriguing question because our association has been grappling with cost of production. We historically, one of our previous presidents led an investment in it, which was done about 10 years ago, maybe 15, and we've been trying to update that. And it's difficult because people get caught up in the complexity of yield and price alongside costs,
Mm.
and they get paralyzed. And so the short answer is we don't have anything where you can press a button and here it's there. I get my industry comparisons by talking to fellow growers that have similar fields that I have and that talk about some of their inputs, but we don't have any formal uh, formula or framework that is available, and we should have, and we should be spending more time talking about this in our meetings. Um, our research committee tends to zoom in more on, effectiveness of herbicides and things like that, whereas our bottom line is dependent on our cost of production, and I don't think we spend enough energy around building that comparison template that would be valuable.
Interesting. Thank you. Yvonne?
Yeah, there's not really a benchmark here. I think Nova Scotia is still considered a very young viticulture sort of, or very young wine industry. So I think Katerina is working on getting some numbers ready and trying to find the middle ground here. But coming from Germany, I there is standardized numbers, but then the history there goes way back. So you can there's little booklets you can buy or download, and then you get a good idea of what your cost could be. But then also, as Jeff mentioned, with the volatility of prices, it, it can vary quite a bit. But yeah, it would be great to have specific numbers for Nova Scotia in the viticulture area. That I think that's the ultimate goal for all of us.
What do you think, Sam?
I mean, there are some tools available. But just for fun, I just pulled up the Nova Scotia Department of Agriculture Business Planning and Economics of Apple Orchard Establishment and Cost of Production in Nova Scotia, which is a great resource that the NSDA put out 17 years ago. But when I go and look at it like this, I think this is the most up-to-date one they have. The densities are, half again lower than what we plant now. The cost of inputs now is drastically higher than they were then. So there's some work that's been done, but with how rapidly the business changes in terms of input costs, pricing volatility, labor costs, I think it's tough to find something that's up to date and that kind of scales to your and is as specific to your operation as you need it to. We looked at when I was at the International Fruit Tree Association convention in Washington a couple of years ago, and I think in Michigan as well. They had a couple panels and sessions on grower cost of production, and there were some tools being developed. But again, like I think they might give you the bare bones skeleton of a plan, but you really have to put in the work to tailor it to your own operation. And I know we'd all probably prefer to be out working in the fields and sitting in and developing out these tools. But the thing about pruning is you have to do it every year. The thing about developing out this kind of framework and these tools is once you've done the legwork and built out the tools for your farm, then it's very minimal upkeep. For us to go in and when we track our labor costs for the day, um, it's maybe 90 seconds, hitting, going into the entry sheet, plugging in a couple numbers, and you're done. So making it easy to do from the get-go makes it's sort of easier to use for us. So no, there's not we don't have perfect access to what our competitors are doing. But like I said, we have a really good, robust local industry in Nova Scotia. At least for apple growers specifically, we regularly meet. We share a lot of info as much as we can. We put on workshops on pruning and horticultural practices, and we work with Perennia to put on workshops like this. So the tools are the bones of the tools are out there, but in order to make it work for your operation, it's going to take a little bit of legwork.
Now, I really like your point of it's going to be, you got to do it once. You're probably going to be itching to be doing something else, and it's probably not the most fun job, but from there you can kind of just cruise with it, which I think is great. Gary, do you have any benchmarks?
Um, it's hard with the high tunnels because when we started, we were one of the first ones in Nova Scotia to have the high tunnels to this extent to grow vegetables and berries under. We basically based our goals for cost production, yields, etc., from Michigan or Eastern United States, which is a different climate than Nova Scotia. So we couldn't really have an accurate benchmark off of that stuff. And still, there's a few more people high tunnel operations now growing the same crops as we do, but I don't see their numbers. So, but other people that have come in and seen our operation that come from the states, Florida, Michigan, and I tell them what our numbers are, they say we're doing quite well, especially for this climate, but it's variety specific too. A lot of the varieties we grow, you here, they don't grow in the States because they have better yielding varieties in the States that are warmer weather crops or warmer weather varieties. So we're limited to what we can use up here for varieties because of our winter season. especially in the blackberries. So
No,
we've only got a two or three different varieties that we can grow, and we're trialing one right now. Hopefully it works out. We'll see if we can keep it to survive this winter. So, but our benchmarks were basically drawn off of what they could grow in the eastern states for a lot of our crops, and some of the other stuff we do, they're just not grown in high tunnels that I know of. So we're the first ones to do them.
yeah, I can really appreciate the variety access and performance as well. There's just so much out there for certain hort crops. It's really hard to have that thing to compare. And I also really appreciate everyone's comments on volatility, right? Even if we had, that perfect cost of production model from 2022, I don't know how useful that would be for us here today. So I apologize for us running a bit late. I thought that was a really good question sort of to end us out. Um, so thank you for sticking with us. Matt, you want to
Yeah, I
finish
just
things up
got,
here?
yeah, no problem. So, yeah, I just want to thank all the panelists for joining us today and well, everyone who jumped on to watch. I think that was a great discussion. Just going to pop up something quickly here, which I guess this is less important now because this is our last session. But I just wanted to say this is our last session for getting into the weeds for this year. So thanks everyone who's watched all of the sessions, or at least a portion of them, or coming out here today. There is a survey in the chat. Please take it. We appreciate people's feedback on what we're delivering, and hopefully can give you guys better stuff, or keep doing a good job, hopefully. But that's pretty much everything. We're going to just leave this up for a minute if anybody wants to grab that link from the chat. But otherwise, thank you for joining today, and you're all good to go.